Hey everybody, this is KennedyHawk from the MCM podcast team, and we are back to doing a weekly tier list on the podcast through our YouTube channel and potentially audio feed. So if you're listening to this in your earbuds, that means it's on the audio feed, and if you're watching it on YouTube, then you've got the visuals to go along with it. But what we're going to do is each week we're going to tier list a different item in Marvel Champions, and I'm having our patrons pick some of the topics for me for each month. So if you would like to help me pick the topics, or if you have something you really want me to tier list, you can sponsor us at patreon.com/MCM podcast, or you can just PM me on Discord and I'll probably add it to my list because I really love doing stuff like this. It's super fun. So, what I did for this first tier list weekly kickoff was I polled our patrons and I said, what aspect would you like me to tier list my favorite heroes in? And our patrons, making me a glutton for punishment, knew that I would love to talk about protection cards for half an hour. So here we go with the MCM Podcast Weekly Tier List of KennedyHawk's Protection Hero Tier List. So let's go through how we're going to rate these different heroes, these different protection heroes, what my judging criteria is going to be. Just a disclaimer, these are my thoughts and opinions. It's not scientific fact. I'm not crunching numbers and telling you this character is definitively better than this character. If that was true, I would always just say Doctor Strange is best. If I dislike your favorite protection pairing, then post it in the comments below on YouTube, send it to me on Discord, or post it in the deck building channel because I want to try out your awesome decks that highlight protection cards, especially with heroes that I don't know how to pair them with. So, what I'm going to be judging things on are three categories. Is there a clear play pattern for this hero? Does this hero have a clear protection play pattern that anyone can figure out? Am I having to deck build meticulously to make this hero work in protection, or do they sort of naturally fall into a defenseless, full defense, and HP pool sort of pattern? There's a lot of different ways you can build protection at this point, because we've got more than 2 years of cards. And I want to know, is there a way that this hero excels in, and does it really jam with protection? Kind of a catch-all category. Second thing is player count viability. So I want to know, is this a hero that works in protection only in solo? Or is it a hero that works in protection only in multiplayer? Or is it sort of a varied character? I would love, for me, to rate a character highly, I want them to work well with protection in solo and multiplayer. Most characters can work well in protection and multiplayer, but a lot of them can struggle in solo, and that's what I really want to see here. And then finally, variety. So I talked about having a clear play pattern earlier. It's nice if, Captain America, for example, is very good at full defense. And what I would consider full defense is where what you're trying to defend and take no damage. He starts with a 3 defense. He's got a lot of good defense in his kit to take no damage when defending, so he can trigger a lot of those if you defend and take no damage triggers. So has a clear play pattern in protection there, but he also has variety. You could play all sorts of different ways with Captain America within protection, and that's something I want to see. If a character is just an autofill deck, am I always including the same protection cards to make this character work in protection? Then that's kind of a negative for how I engage with this game, so I kind of downrate the characters for that. So, with this, we will move on to looking at exactly how we're going to judge, and let's get to judging these characters. So, I've got all the characters pulled up here. I even brought in Miles and Ghost Spider. There's 2 copies of Ghost Spider down here. I don't know what I did, but I loaded 2 of them in. But we're going to be putting these characters into different categories. So our categories are the Super Defender S tier, the A Pretty Good Protection Player tier, the B tier, you always got to have a B tier, the Could Be Better C tier, and the Don't Run Green Cards Here D tier. So I'm going to try to work my way from the bottom up and talk about the characters that I think don't work as well in protection first. And then once I've figured that out, we'll go to the C tier characters and so on. And people might move as I think more about them throughout the day. All right. So characters that I think don't work super well in protection. And there are a couple of them. First of all, let's just throw Hawkeye right up there. I think Hawkeye is definitely my favorite character. He has a clear play pattern of I can barely defend. I have 9 hit points, I have 1 defense, and I have Mockingbird to do defending for me. And he relies on status conditions to be able to defend. There are some status conditions in protection. We can run Tackle, we can run Hard Knocks, and things like that. But they're really expensive for him to still be able to afford his arrow kits. So I don't think he has a clear play pattern. He doesn't have an increased HP pool for those if you're above your starting health cards. He definitely doesn't want to run defenseless protection. You could put a bunch of energy barriers and things in there to help him mitigate things. But not great for the clear play pattern category. I think he does have player count viability. I think you can run a pretty cool protection deck with Hawkeye using some of those events at higher player counts where you don't have to focus on controlling the villain every turn with your arrow status conditions. And I think it actually does shore up a weakness because there's a lot of recurring allies that are really cheap in protection. So I think he can make a pretty viable solo protection deck. So I'll give him some points there. But as far as variety goes, he's just including the cheapest cards that protection has to offer. He doesn't jam well with a lot of the protection cards. So like if you're building a deck, you're probably using like 20 of the same 25 cards. Honestly, if I'm building a protection Hawkeye deck, I'm probably including more basic cards than protection cards. So I'm going to put him in the don't run green here. That doesn't mean you can't run a great green protection Hawkeye deck, but it's not always the best. All right. Sadly, I am also going to put She-Hulk in here, and I used to be a big She-Hulk green defender. I think she still could be there with things like leading blow and counterpunch, but the problem with this is She-Hulk kits has 1-2 punch in it, so she wants to ready constantly. So you can run protection. You can have a pretty clear play pattern with her, where you run all of the readying protection cards. So you're running Indomitables and Desperate Defenses and things like that. So you can use her beefy 2 defense stat and also get to use her 3 attack stat. Unfortunately, that means she's like really starved for resources. So it just doesn't work well for me. I've tried to do it and be real cute with counter punches and superhuman strength and stuff like that. And it's a fun deck to play, but it's not a very player count viable deck, and it doesn't offer a lot of variety. You kind of build the same deck every time. Things don't change very much. I don't expect there to be a ton of low protection heroes. I am going to put Vision in here, and Vision is in here mainly because of his intangible form. So if we read Vision's intangible form, I'll get pulled up here really quick. So Vision came with the protection deck, and his intangible form says mass form permanent, Vision cannot attack or defend. That means all of those defend cards in his protection deck he can't run. He can barely run protection cards because so many of them are defense cards and the way that RRG 1.4 works. So I have him down here in don't run green here land because I really feel like he just doesn't work well there. He can definitely run it. He can definitely be fun with it. It just doesn't lean into his strengths. It doesn't shore up his weaknesses. And he's just not a character that I would be running in protection. All right. I am going to go ahead and put at least 1 or 2 more characters here in the D tier, I think. I'm going to go ahead and put Venom in the D tier for protection. It's not because Venom protection is bad. Venom anything is good. But a lot of what protection does is try to keep your HP pool up, and a lot of protection's cards want you to have high health and you want to be soaking extra attacks, and Venom wants to use that life resource as resources instead. So I don't want to be burning my life resources by claiming extra attacks and defending for other players. I want to use them to accelerate my game. So I don't really see Venom as a super tier defending character. You know what? I'm going to put him in the could be better tier. I think he's almost there, and there is some healing in protection too, so I should bring that up. There's a lot of healing in protection, so you can stay in hero form longer, which is definitely something that Venom really, really likes to do. All right, my final character in the D tier is going to be Miss Marvel. I think there are a lot of Miss Marvel protection decks that work. I've got this stupid Fighting Fit deck. I've seen people running other Miss Marvel protection decks, but there just aren't enough quality defense events that Ms. Marvel wants to bounce to her hand to keep the villain going. You could stun lock with things like Tackle and Never Back Down. It'd be really hard to get to enough defense with Never Back Down without using your wiggle rooms. But just doesn't jam well with protection. She does have really high recovery, so you can soak an attack and you flip a lot. But that's another thing that's kind of a downfall for protection, is the card doesn't have a lot of capability for you to catch up after you flip. So if you are a hero that wants to flip to alter ego form, you're going to struggle a little bit. And some heroes are better than that than others, but Miss Marvel in general is pretty good at flipping and making up for that threat loss, but it can be really hard when you're running protection cards. All right, we're going to go into the could be better tier, and here I'm going to put Iron Man and Rocket. I think Iron Man and Rocket are very fun protection decks, but a majority of their protection deck just revolves around taking whatever tech upgrades exist in protection and jamming them into their deck because that's what works with their hero. So you end up making not a very, yeah, I guess it is kind of a very samey deck every time you run them. There's not a lot of other synergy that I've seen within protection for these heroes. With Iron Man, you can always just include all the lightning bolt resources you can find and all the tech upgrades, but that you can do in almost every aspect at this point. So it's not very exciting or interesting to me for Iron Man. And it's sad because Iron Man Protection, when Miss Marvel's pack came out, was like my protection deck that I ran all the time. It was the deck for protection for me because those energy barriers were so sweet. But nowadays we have so many options for tech upgrades that I just don't see the excitement in running it in protection. Yeah, so I feel the same way about Rocket. You can get those tech upgrades out there, you can discard them, but we don't have like a lot of innate healing in Rocket. We don't have like the wants to defend. It's just kind of like, well, we ran them in green because we could, right? All right. You know what? I'm going to jump to B tier with a few characters here. I'm going to put Thor, and I'm going to move Iron Man up to B tier right now, because one thing that Thor and Iron Man do have that I didn't mention is a really high HP pool. They have hero kit cards that can put them above their starting HP value. That means cards like Fighting Fit and Dauntless and things like that can turn on, and that's really, really cool. It's a new, relatively new, sort of archetype for protection that these two heroes support, so I really love the idea of building decks around that with Endurance, Honorary Avenger, and Fighting Fit, and crazy stuff like that. Fighting Fit's a bad card, don't get me wrong, but as we get more cards that are as you are above your starting HP pool, those characters could really thrive in protection. So we're going to put them in the B tier because they've got that cool potential. I know I said I was going to go top to bottom, but I just want to talk about the characters that I know what I want to say about them. So Ant-Man and Black Panther, we're going up here in the Super Defenders tier. These characters both have really good innate healing, whether it's through Pym Particles or Ant-Man's helmet, or through Black Panther's, not Tactical Genius, Vibranium suit to take damage off yourself and place it on the villain. Having hero form healing is huge. When you could heal yourself in hero form, and for the same reason, we're going to throw Spider-Woman up there, protection, anything. You can stay in hero form forever, which is what protection really wants to do. That is their threat mitigation. So these characters thrive at that. They can stay in hero form forever, and there's a lot of really good S-tier heroes. So these three in particular, I think they have a clear play pattern of having their HP pool full, and then being able to defend really well with good defense stats. They have good player count viability. You can play these characters and defend for multiple people. You can defend for just yourself in solo and lean into things like Retaliate or the healing from Ant-Man. And they have a lot of variety. I've seen a ton of different Black Panther decks for protection. I've seen some that try to defend multiple times and stun and rely on his upgrades to deal the damage. I've seen some that rely on electrostatic armor and Dauntless and keeping your HP pool full to like prick damage back. So that's really cool. I love having multiple play patterns. And with Spider-Woman, obviously there's going to be a million different combinations, including the protection leadership Captain Marvel combo that everybody seems to love oh so much. So definitely 3 S-tier characters. Let's keep going along the S-tier train here. We're going to throw up Captain America and Spider-Man. So these two heroes, after their setup, will have 3 defense. That makes them really strong. Now, not every character with 3 defense is really strong in protection, because sometimes they just don't get enough cards in their hand to be able to do anything with it. But Cap and Spidey both have defense in their kit. They can trigger the full defense abilities really, really well. They can also trigger the stay at your full hit points pool really well, because they both have really efficient healing cards when they flip down, and they both can defend really, really well without taking damage, so hopefully they can just stay at full health the whole time. Love them. They are definitely super defender tier. There's some really cool new decks with Captain America and Spider-Man using Flow Like Water and electrostatic armor and a bunch of things to ping back damage while you're just taking no damage the entire game. And it makes for a long game, but a really tense and interesting game. All right. I'm going to put Quicksilver also up in the S tier. Then I'll be done with the S tier for a little bit until we figure out who else we want to place there. Quicksilver with his free defense is definitely an S tier hero for being a super defender. He can get himself up to 2 defense in his kit, plus he's got all those other stat boosts. He works really well with Armored Vest, obviously. Getting a free 3 defend ability is really, really strong. And he doesn't really rely on flipping down. You can flip down and shuffle in all of your always be runnings, but usually you do that to like end the game. So if you're doing that in solo and protection, you can usually afford that one flip up, try to kill a villain, and not worry about fixing the threat problem that you just caused, which is what I would do with Quicksilver. All right, moving on from the S tier, I want to talk about some what I think I would consider A tier heroes. I'm gonna put. Who should we talk about first? Let's put Black Widow there. I think she's on the verge of being S tier because her suit is so good and can get her up to 3 defense and ready her after she defends with all her preparations triggering. But Black Widow has the problem of she has to draw into that suit. She doesn't get it on setup like Cap and Spidey get their 3 defense on setup. And she also has to be able to trigger a preparation. So it's a lot of preparation work to get that preparation trigger to go off and ready yourself after defending round after round. Black Widow also loves to flip, and flipping is one of the hardest things for solo protection players to do. And she doesn't necessarily always have a covert ops that she can play to confuse the villain to shore that up. She is still a really strong hero. I mean, She-Hulk has a 2 defense, can ready in all sorts of ways, and she's a D tier. So there's a big difference between Black Widow protection and She-Hulk protection. But she's not quite in the S tier for me anymore. And I used to take a lot of heroic on with Black Widow protection, so that's saying something that all these other characters have grown a little bit more with the recent card pool than Black Widow has. Alright, I'm going to put Protection Drax up in the A tier as well. He is a pretty good protection player. I love Drax. He's probably my favorite hero of that wave. He's super fun to play. He's got that barbarian aspect to him, where as he takes more damage or as he takes more attacks, he gets stronger. Very, very fun in multiplayer. I struggle with it in solo, and maybe I'm just a bad solo player. Let's admit, I am a bad solo player. But I really love Drax protection in multiplayer. I think he's got a pretty clear play pattern of wanting to soak extra attacks, but there's still a lot of variety and nuance in his deck building and how you manipulate his deck, what you do with Mantis, when you switch from taking attacks to chump blocking is like this really engaging, pivotal moment in the game, and I really love that about Drax. All right, we're continuing on. Spectrum is also going to be up here in the A tier. This does not mean that Spectrum is not an S tier hero. She definitely is. She is really strong. What I find with Spectrum protection that keeps her out of the S tier for me, might even throw her into the B tier, is a lot of times, I'm putting her in the B tier. When I want to defend, I'm always in the wrong form. And I never have the event that jumps me into the right form. And even when I jump there, I get to heal 1 and have 3 defense, but I don't get that retaliate. Like, I want that retaliate. And I don't want to sit in the 1-1-3 form the entire game. So for me, she's a little bit of a B tier hero. She needs a little bit more to really, maybe a couple more flipping protection cards, like Perseverance and things like that, to really solidify her as an A or S tier protection character. All right. Star-Lord, he's going to be in the could be better tier. His protection stats aren't terrible, but he throws so many things at you that you're going to have a hard time. Like, you can run really fun decks with him in protection, with hard knocks and things like that to get rid of minions for free, but you're going to be playing so many encounter cards and dealing with so many of them, and protection does have ways to cancel those and turn those into attacks, but he doesn't exactly have the HP pool that means, hey, I can soak 1,000,000 attacks a turn. He does have bad boy shenanigans and stuff like that, but I still think he could be better in protection before I would move him up to even the B tier. He's not even in the bland, generico B tier. All right, I'm going to put Groot up in the B tier as well, and that's mainly because I feel like solo Groot protection really struggles. He's definitely got a clear play pattern of taking no damage when he defends, right? His growth counters will help with that. He can also stay at a high HP pool, so he's very varied in what kind of decks he can build within protection. But for player count viability, protection just does not shore up a weakness for him. It makes solo really, really difficult. A lot of Groot's cards rely on you having a lot of growth counters in play, and when you're constantly taking damage from attacks, you're not having those growth counters to trigger all of your hero abilities, and you end up just treading a lot of water or treading a lot of logs in water or whatever. But yeah, B tier for me. I know he came with protection. A lot of the characters that came with protection I'm actually rating fairly low. So that's a bit unfortunate, but I think that he could be really good in protection with a little bit more help or support. All right, let's look at another 3 defense hero. I'm going to put Hulk down in the don't run green here. And here's my reasoning for that. A majority of green cards are cards that you play during the villain phase. And a lot of the nuance of learning how to run protection really well, which I have not mastered, by the way, so take that with a grain of salt, is that you need to be able to decide when I should hold an important response or interrupt event in my hand for the next villain phase. Because you draw your hand up at the beginning of the villain phase. If you hold on to that card, you're wasting a resource. That decision is completely taken away from Hulk. So if you want to run a counterpunch deck, you better plan on top decking counterpunch so that when the villain attacks you, you can counterpunch him. And if you want to run a desperate defense or a never back down protection deck, same thing. And I know there's a lot of people that talk and breathe the church of Hulk protection. I am not one of those people. I find Hulk protection extremely fiddly, extremely top decky, and it's like exactly everything that I hated about Galaxy's Most Wanted, all the RNG. I've just added it to my hero deck. And if I could have an F tier, which I will never have, Hulk would be in it. I'm sorry, Hulk. I really like deck building with Hulk, but if I had to deck build with Hulk protection or play a different game, I would play a different game. So I said it, we're over it, we're moving on. Let's do something easy. Adam Warlock. We're going to put him in the B tier. He doesn't really get to pick an aspect, so I think he does have a lot of really cool protection cards that he can include in his kit. But with a lot of protection cards being response events, I'm even going to put him in the could be better tier because there's not a lot of one of cards in protection that you know you can consistently draw into with Adam Warlock. Stinks for multiple man, stinks for all those event response decks that you can't make them consistent, so I'm going to put him in the could be better tier. All right, we're moving on to Doctor Strange. I'm going to put him in the B tier. And again, this is just like Spectrum. Doctor Strange is definitely an S tier hero. He's probably the best hero in the game still. In fact, I will say he is the best hero in the game still. But protection really doesn't do anything special for him. I've tried to make fun protection decks with him, and I still just rely on spamming invocations every turn, which isn't very fun. You can do cool doctory things with him, like running Second Wind and med teams and making this like raid healer deck. But you're just being funsy at that point with Doctor Strange. You could just end the game with your Bands of Sidorak instead. So what really are you buying yourself? Not a ton. He doesn't need to flip, so I mean, he doesn't need to be in the could be better tier, because he could stay in hero form the whole game and just spam tough on himself. But again, that's not using the protection cards. It's just kind of like blit. It's there. Doesn't need improvement. It's probably not going to be improved because it would be major power creep in the aspect cards to make Doctor Strange engaging in any aspect. All right. I'm going to put Wanda in... I'm going to save Wanda. I'm going to put Nebula in the could be better tier. And the reason for this is Nebula really wants to flip a lot. And she really relies on having the right techniques in play, and she has to flip to draw cards to get into those techniques. So a lot of times you'll draw into a hand of cards that are defense events, and you'll be in the wrong form, the villain will scheme, and you can't do anything to stop that with them. It's a bit unfortunate. If we get some cards in the future that are like, when the villain schemes, you take it as damage, so kind of like well, I guess we have that, but it's Injustice. If we get some of those things in protection, where you can take scheme onto yourself in alter ego form, that'll be really cool. But for now, she just needs to flip too much. She doesn't have enough to compensate that to make protection really viable for me. I know there's people that have played Nebula in protection and they really enjoy her, but that's not... when I play a flipping hero, I like to flip every turn, and I like to use every card in my hand every turn. So protection Nebula is a hard pass for me. She could be better. She does have 2 defense, so at the end of the day, I can't throw her in the D tier. Because she's not like as bad as Hulk in protection or Hawkeye in protection, but she's just not there for me. She does have retaliate and some cute things, but they're just not permanent, so it's a bit of a bummer. All right, Gamora protection, definitely A tier. Protection's biggest problem is it doesn't have thwart and attack events. I'm even gonna throw her up in S tier. And you can do all the cool protection shenanigans with Gamora's 2/2/2 stat line, and then you can bring the best 6 thwart and attack events along from the other aspects. That is amazing. Gamora is a great protection character, and I love playing her in protection. So she has clear play pattern of rely on my defense to keep me alive, and then rely on my unique deck building to seal the game, Works in solo and multiplayer very well. And yeah, just a lot of variety in that character just because of the different aspects you can bring in. All right, Valkyrie protection. I'm going to put in B tier, and this is a common problem for Valkyrie at this point, is because her hero kit is so split, and like half the cards want Death Glow on the villain and half want them on minions. She ends up with a lot of dead cards in her hand in protection, especially the ones that are like bringing minions out when she has Death Glow on the villain. You don't really care to have more minions at that point, but she wants Death Glow on the villain so she can get her extra defense stat against him from her upgrades. So she's on a little bit of a pickle where she's kind of a jack of all trades character like Captain America, but it's not an optional jack of all trades. Like with Cap, you discard a card to ready and you can use any of his stats. With her, it's like half your cards are good for one situation, half are good for the other, but you never want to use both. So it causes a little bit of a chokehold there. All right, I'm going to put War Machine in B tier. He likes to flip, just like Nebula, but he's got a really good card for protection with flipping that pushes him up into the B tier. And that is his Chassis that gives him tough every time he flips into hero form. That is huge. That means you can rely on that to trigger all your I defend and take no damage abilities if you want to, or you can rely on that to soak your attack and then defend for another player in multiplayer. He's super varied. He doesn't really have the thwart to handle that, so he can struggle a little bit with threat, but because of never back down and things like that in protection, he can still handle it well enough in solo and protection. So I'm going to put him in the B tier. Pretty happy with the variety of decks I've seen for Iron Man protection. I'm pretty happy with the player count viability, and I think he has a clear play pattern, like he has a clear path to success in this aspect. All right. I'm going to put Wasp here in the B tier as well. You know what? I'm going to put Wasp up in the... Yeah, she's going to go in the B tier. No, she's going to go in the A tier. Changed my mind. Wasp is kind of like Gamora. She has rapid growth to really help her with defending. She can jump to the other form and get +2 defense or whatever that card does. I can't even remember. It's been so long since I played Wasp. But she has a ton of really, really good attacks. So like Gamora, like I said, your strength is you're going to be able to include these best attacks from the other aspects. Wasp already has some of the best attack events built into her kit. What she doesn't have is a ton of resources, so you're going to have to figure out how to shore up her resource economy, whether that's running the power of resources or a lot of resource generators. You'll have to figure out what you're going to do there, but it'll work out in the long run. I really like Wasp protection. I think she's got good stats in giant form, and she can get to retaliate, she can get to prevent damage with her upgrades. She's got a lot of really cool protection tools, and I feel like that's a pretty untapped deck. There aren't a ton of Wasp protection decks flying around, pun, on the DB. So if someone wants to make a cool Wasp protection deck and leave it in the comments, I will make sure to stream it in the next 2 weeks. That will be really, really cool. I would love to see it. All right, we've got just 3 more heroes here.